always loved reading the Old Testament, and especially reading about guys that are in the fringes, the collateral damage, the individuals who stand on the sidelines, and basically they're not the main characters. And it's the case here in this with Gehazi, and Ronnie did a great job. He told me when I go, Boyce was here, so he's supposed to read the scripture because he wouldn't have to say Gehazi. But no, he did a good job. I like that. I appreciate him stepping up right quick, because that was a rather long reading, and I intended for that to kind of tell the story so I could tell it my own way. But this transpires in the middle of a whole bunch of incidents that has to do with Elisha. And without having to go too deep into it, I want you to know that Elisha was an incredibly forgiving, easygoing prophet. You'd never know that by the way he did things, but he was. He was a gentle, kind person. He always tried to do his best and try to help somebody. I mean, he didn't go out of his way to take credit for things. And certainly that was the case with Naaman. And part of the reason I like this text and this character as a lesson is because everybody knows about Naaman. You know, being told by Gehazi, because Gehazi was Elisha's servant, to go down the Jordan and wash 7 times. And Naaman went off the hook. He was upset because he was expecting something totally different with all kinds of pomp, circumstance, and fanfare. It didn't happen. It was just simple instruction that wasn't terribly pleasant. Evidently, the Jordan's not a real pretty clean river. Some of y'all may have been overseas and seen that, but evidently it's not pretty. And he thought 5 or 6 other cities would have been just as good. And somebody in Naaman's camp talked him into going back and doing what Elisha said. And lo and behold, he was made well. Now it's just automatic. You'd think Naaman's totally thankful, grateful for what had been transpired. And so he goes back to thank Elisha, and Elisha said, no, I don't want anything. Okay, Gehazi is kind of on the perimeter out here, and he's going, wait a minute. You just got healed of the worst disease that we know of in this day and age. It's the one where you get ostracized, and then you got to holler at people, unclean, unclean, and you can't, have close relationships because this thing is an ugly deal. And that's all he has to be held accountable for. He gets to go off free, no charge. As a matter of fact, there's an interesting study one can do about the fact that this guy was in charge of the general, and he was his bodyguard evidently, or something to that effect. And his general, his boss, went in and worshipped an idol, and Naaman's going, I know the God of Israel is the real God. So when I go in and worship this God, I'm not really worshiping, I'm just kind of present so that I can be a bodyguard to my king. And he specifically asked Elijah, can I get a pass? And Elijah said, sure, not a problem. Because in your heart, you know you're not worshiping. You're there to protect the king. And it's interesting, some of the sidelines to that, like the fact that just because you're in the same presence of everybody worshiping, doesn't mean you're worshiping. But anyway, we won't go into that lesson. Let's go forward and understand that Gehazi decided, this guy needs to pay up something for what he has received. And Gehazi is thinking, what better man to receive that payment than me, since Elisha don't want it. I'll take care of that. And so he chases him down. The guy gets out of the chariot thinking something's wrong. He goes, no, nothing's wrong. And the first mistake he makes is he tells him a lie. He tells him a lie and says, oh, we've had visitors, 2 young men, sons of the prophet. They come, they need something. No, they didn't. There was no guests, no visitors, no sons of the prophet. This was to be spent on him. And what's amazing, too, is Naaman is so pleased, he gives him 2 changes of clothes, garments, but he also gives him 2 talents of silver. I don't know if you noticed that in the reading. All that was asked for was 1, and Naaman's so grateful. He gives him 2. And so Gehazi not only got what he wanted, but he got a tip. And so he's headed back, he stows at the house, and he goes before his master and Elisha, knowing what went on. Say, dude, where'd you go? Oh, I didn't go anywhere. Lie number 2. The guy's beginning to make a habit of this, and that's not a good thing. And so, and again, this is just in character with Elisha. But I want you to notice verse 26. I don't know of very many places where somebody gets called on the carpet for doing something terrible, horrible, bad. Lying, man, that's the devil's, offspring right there, lies. The liars are going to hell, Revelation 20 and something or other there at the early part of the chapter. That's just going to happen. Lying is a serious thing. Liars we don't tolerate. That's not right. And yet, with all of that, and the fact that he actually took stuff that didn't belong to him from Ammon, he says, it's just almost like a father to his son. Did not my heart go with you when the man turned back in his chariot to meet you? Don't you know that I was with you there? My heart was with you. This was a call down for what the guy had done. And Gehazi knew he was guilty. And in the next verse, Elisha said, well, here's the consequences of telling lies, taking something that really didn't belong to you, because frankly, it wasn't Gehazi's to receive. And so he's going to have this leprosy that Naaman was healed of. And the leprosy was for you, and listen to this, your descendants. It's unfortunate that we make mistakes. I think sometimes, at least in my perspective, it's more unfortunate that some of the mistakes I have made have been a cost for my wife and my children and my family and my friends. I can't speak for you, but I regret seriously. If it was just me, I'd say, okay, I deserve this. Beat me, tear me up. I deserve this. But my kids and my wife and my friends, they were innocent, collateral damage, bystanders. They didn't deserve sometimes the consequences of what I did wrong. But we have to think about that when we go to thinking we can do something and get away with it, that if we get caught, it's just me on the block. That's not true. The things we do impact everybody around us, and we need to think about that before we make mistakes, because it was you and your descendants and forever. This visible public blemish is going to be seen by everybody forever. Sounds like small town, growing up in a small town, doesn't it? I've talked about that before here. When, I grew up in small towns, and you do something, like laying down the highway in front of a semi. I told you this story. That's not pretty, and everybody in town knew it. And I got in trouble when I got home, and to this day, when I go to the prior, there's old people there who go, yeah, I remember you. And I know what they remember. It got all over the place. It's just hard to get rid of those kind of things. It just kind of stays with you the rest of your life. So how do we deal with that? We get bitter, we get angry, we do something sideways. Well, I want to show you in the Bible how Gehazi handled this. And there's several neat implications that we must draw from the revelation that God gives us in chapter 8. And really the story begins in chapter 8, verse 1. But during all the time in which Elisha is doing all these wonderful, magnificent things, and just doing them out of the goodness of his heart, he gets a guy's axe head back, makes iron float. He saves the city from an overwhelming destruction from the Syrians. He even saves the Syrians the Israelites after the Syrians are surrounded. Elisha's doing all kinds of great things, but God's fed up with the children of Israel, and he's going to send a famine. And we got a famine coming, and this lady with whom Elisha had healed her son, she's going to be right in the middle of this famine and starve once again. And Elisha goes and tells her, you need to move out of the country. So she moves out of the country. Well, as is the case, when people left their homestead, guess what? Somebody else moved in, claimed it, started farming it, took it over. Well, after the famine, she comes back. She's found to stand before the king and say, now, king, this land belongs to me. Now, what kind of evidence would she have? Well, lo and behold, in verse 4, if you'll read along with me there, then the king talked with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, tell me, please, all of the great things Elisha has done. Now, I want to point out right off the bat that after Gehazi was condemned to have leprosy and his descendants all of his life, and he, was found out, he was still the servant of Elisha. Elisha didn't kick him out the door. A lot of times when we look at people who have made mistakes, they made a mistake and that's it. We draw the line. We don't have more of that. We know who they are. You tell one little story that gets a little out of hand, and all of a sudden you're a liar for life. That's not fair. That's not right. People make mistakes, and it doesn't make them who they are because they made a mistake. And aren't you and I thankful that's the case? Because there's not one of us here sitting here that lived perfect, hadn't made a mistake. That if that's the way people looked at us, we'd carry a burden all of our lives. And I know it's hard enough as it is because I know God forgives me, but was there to remind me of everything I've done wrong. And I'll bet Gehazi had to deal with that because his curse was very public and very visible. But yet we still find him here. He's serving Elisha and standing as a witness as to what Elisha did. Now, you know, if you were a little vindictive, a little bitter about the way things came down, you might not be terribly gracious about how you talked about somebody that just told you, guess what, you got leprosy. And yet that's the opposite. We find Gehazi here. It happened. He was telling the king how he had restored the dead to life, that there was the woman whose son he had restored to life, appealing to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, my lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. I think he learned that lying was not a good way to go and decided to tell the truth. And the truth had great consequences, which we always talk about, the consequences of sin, don't we? I mean, that's something we hobby on. Let me tell you something. When you do the right thing, there are some consequences from that too. And we need to emphasize that sometime. We look at Gehazi, and I've heard lots of lessons on Gehazi. In fact, I got curious one time. I started looking up all the lessons I could find on Gehazi. Why, if you used to believe everything that you heard about what people did in lessons, you'd think, oh, Gehazi's a dirty bird. He's just not a very nice person. But nobody goes over to chapter 8 and decides, wait a minute, that was not the end of who Gehazi was. That was not the end of his life or the end of his legacy. And here we find him, by the way, standing before the king of Israel. And he's still got that visible public problem he had. So if you want to pick at the guy, he's there. You can't bypass it. But he's being called as an eyewitness to verify with the truth of who Elisha was and what went down. Somewhere along the line between when he got leprosy and when this occurred, Gehazi had regained his legacy, his image, his credibility, because he was standing before a king and giving witness. All right? Nobody just decided, oh, I'll give a witness. That's not how it worked. You had to have some kind of credibility. Gehazi had credibility. He didn't have that immediately after he got leprosy. Believe me, people looked at him and go, what happened to you? But that's something he gained back. And you'll notice, too, that when he did tell the truth, the consequences, well, the king asked the woman, and she told him. So the king appointed a certain fit officer for her, saying, restore all that was hers and all the proceeds of the field from the day she left the land until now. So by extension, Elisha took care of this woman one more time, but he did it through the same guy that he wasn't able to depend on before. I think sometimes we miss the real pragmatic, practical, rubber meets the road application of forgiveness and how we start fresh and how over the course of time we can get our integrity back. I know people talk about, trust. You broke my trust and I just can't trust you anymore. Well, let me tell you a secret. You can't earn trust. Okay? Trust is given. It's a gift. And it's something we ought to think more serious about when it comes to people who make mistakes. They made mistakes. But let's not define people by who they were. Let's try to remember that every sin we have has a consequence, but we don't do anybody any good by heaping upon them more negative input about what they did wrong after the fact. When somebody's done wrong, it will have permanent consequences. We don't have to help that out. What we need to do is be a forgiving people, because the consequences they are bearing is probably all they need to bear. We don't need to help them add to their consequences. We need to learn how to forgive people, and in forgiving people, it's not just a matter of, well, I forgive you, but I'll never forget. And I've heard that so much out that it makes me sick. No, you need to forgive. God, who knows all things and never forgets anything, says, I will remember no more the sin you commit. Now, that's not a willful forgetting of something. That just means I'm not going to hold you accountable for it. We all know you did it. There's Gehazi standing there, all parched out with leprosy, which made your skin white and patchy. We call it some other names here today, technically, but the point is, it's very visible. We don't have to tell somebody that. They got that. But what we can do is help them get through. Galatians 6:1 said, we who are spiritual ought to restore those who have problems, those who are overcome in sin. I think we applied ourselves more, our energy more toward the application of helping the person get out of the sin, instead of reminding the person of what they did, we go a lot further and a lot longer about lifting people up and helping them be who they need to be. Folks, every one of us have made mistakes. Some of us have made mistakes. Were it the case that people knew, it'd be hard to live through. It'd be hard to deal with it. Okay? There's a lot of mistakes you've made that I don't know. There's a lot of mistakes I've made you don't know. But let me tell you a little secret. That's not who I am. And that's not who you are. Who we are now is Christians trying to help each other get to heaven. And in order to do that, no matter how much the white leprosy we got on us, let's figure out a way to make it work for us instead of against us. Let's be better than who we've been. Gehazi is really a great, encouraging account of how, even in the sin that you committed, as visible as it was, you can still overcome that. There's nothing you've done you cannot overcome with the help of God and good Christian people like we have here. If you want to respond to the invitation in any way,